Hi, I'm Adam Porter, and this is my top 100 board game mechanisms of all time. So last year I did my top 100 board games of all time, and this year I thought, why not lift that box lid and have a look in those rule books and work out how these games work. So that's what this list is all about. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas of games that you might want to pick up yourself, or if you're a designer, some ideas of the different mechanisms that you could piece together in some unique way to create the experience that you want for your players. So today we're looking at numbers 80 to 71, and number 80 on the list is auctions. Now, my favourite auction games tend to come from Reiner Knizia. I love Priests of Ra, which is a reworking of Ra, I believe. I haven't played Ra, but Priests of Ra is pretty much the same thing. I really like High Society, and I like Modern Art as well. Now, Modern Art features all sorts of different types of auctions in it, so every round you'll be playing a different mechanism. It's kind of a masterclass in using auctions, whereas High Society is a very simple card game where you're auctioning off cards which are worth points. Some of them are worth penalties, so you're auctioning to not take the card, and it's really satisfying. I really love the game For Sale by Stefan Dora, which has two different types of auctions to it, but is really light, much lighter than some of those Knizia games. The challenging thing in an auction, of course, is recognizing the relative values of the different things that you're auctioning. So certain games will lend themselves to repeated plays. You know, the more you play it, the more you get familiar with the different sort of values and how much you should be bidding and how much you shouldn't. So there's a bit of a learning curve to an auction game. A game like Power Grid really benefits if you've played it multiple times and you start to get a feel for how much those different power stations are worth. But a game like For Sale is really simple. It's obvious how much these things are worth because they've just got a great big number on the front of those cards. That's their value. And then in the second half of a game of For Sale, those properties that you've bought in the first half, you're actually going to be playing them in a blind auction, placing them face down in order to bid for checks, money that's going to ultimately win you the game. So auctions, challenging mechanism for new players. Sometimes people don't particularly like them, I think for that reason. But actually, once you get stuck into those games and you get a feel for them, it's really satisfying and exciting. Number 79 is trivia games. Now, trivia is something which modern board gamers don't necessarily sort of lean towards. It's something a little bit more mass market. I suppose we think of games like Trivial Pursuit and things like that, quiz shows on the TV. But actually it can be utilised really effectively in a board game. I really like Timeline and Wits and Wagers and Fauna and its related game Terra. And the reason that I like these games is because you don't have to know the answers. You've just got to have a rough feel, okay? Nobody knows how long that animal's tail is that we're supposed to be talking about in Fauna. Nobody knows exactly when the pencil sharpener was invented or whatever, but we might have a rough feel and be able to make an educated guess, and that's enough in these games. You've just got to be close. And in some of these games, you can even kind of tail off the back of what some other players placed. You know, in Fauna, if somebody's placed a cube in a certain country, you might think, well, okay, they're sort of thinking it's roughly in Africa this animal originates from, so I'll go next door, okay? And you'll even get some points for being close. So I do love a trivia game as long as it recognises that not everybody is going to have totally accurate general knowledge, and it welcomes players in to just have a go, have a shot at it. Number 78 is I Split, You Choose, which is a drafting mechanism whereby you have a pool of usually cards, so a bunch of cards on the table or tiles on the table in the case of animals on board, and then each player will take turns to either split that group into two groups, and so these groups keep on getting broken down into smaller and smaller groups. So you can either split a group or you can take the entire group. Now, often that entire group will have a mixture of things that you want and things that you don't want. So there is a benefit to breaking it down and having smaller groups, but in doing so, you make it more valuable for the other players. So there's a bit of a push your luck sort of feeling about these games. You know, if I break that down, it does create exactly the set of stuff that I want, but maybe somebody else wants it too. And that's where the delicious tension and stress exists in these games. It's a fairly underutilized mechanism. It's something which comes up from time to time, but I think more games could afford to use the I split you choose mechanism. Number 77 on my list is asymmetric play. So this is where each player is working by a different set of rules. Okay, it's perhaps something a little bit bigger than just having their own special abilities. They've actually got a different set of rules. The game works in a different way for them. So often this is where you've got one versus many. So you've got one player who's playing the baddies, and all the other players are playing individual heroes. So that team of heroes is working against the baddie. But the baddie, they use totally different rules, you know, a totally different rule set. Maybe they're using cards where the other players are rolling dice or something like this. There's quite a lot of games that use asymmetric play now, which I find quite daunting. So games like Root and Vast, which have totally different styles of play for the different players. Space Cadets is a cooperative game where every player is doing a slightly different thing. I find this quite daunting because there's a lot of rules to learn there. You've got to learn just not one game, you've got to learn multiple games because you've got to understand what everybody at the table is able to do, the stuff that they're able to do that you're not. But in a simple two-player game, like for example the game Raptor, where one player is playing as scientists and they're trying to capture some dinosaurs to take them back to the lab. Meanwhile, the dinosaur player, they've got a mother dinosaur, and the mother dinosaur is trying to protect their babies from these scientists. And both sides have a completely different set of powers and abilities, and it's really, really satisfying. It's not overwhelming because there's just two players and it's a relatively simple system. So when done in a streamlined fashion, I really like asymmetric play. Number 76 is upgrades. It's really fun when you've got stuff and that stuff gets better throughout the game. So in Taverns of Tiefenthal, I've got my nice little inn, and then every now and then I can flip over a bit of that inn to give myself more tables or more staff or more storage, and things just get better and better for me throughout the game. It's really nice when a game has those options. Some games have cards with special abilities or buildings, and when you flip them a certain way or when you put a token on them, it demonstrates that that thing has now been upgraded and those abilities have got better. So that sense of momentum throughout a game, that sense of progression, the sense of narrative, really helps me to engage in a game. Number 75 is speed perception games, and I really like these games because they get my heart racing, they get my brain going, they're a really good warm-up for playing other games or just a time filler. It's always competitive, it's always funny. So in Dobble, for example, we reveal a card into the centre of the table, every other player has a card in front of them, and there'll always be one matching image on my card that matches the image in the middle. And we've just got to race to spot which is the one item, and it's ridiculously difficult. And sometimes it's ridiculously easy, and there's no rhyme or reason why it's difficult or easy. You're just looking at it thinking, why can't I see the thing? You know? And I find it really satisfying playing those games, really challenging. Another good example is the game Pick a Pig, which is also available in Pick a Dog, Pick a Polar Bear and Pick a Seal versions. But in these games you're looking for a sort of a pattern where you have a card and you've got to look for a card with one difference from your card. So maybe the animal was big, now it's small. Maybe it had one arm, now it's got two arms. Maybe it had some popcorn, now it doesn't. You know, maybe it had some glasses, now it doesn't. Maybe it's changed colour. So each card that you pick up has to have one difference from the cards that you've picked up previously. And so you race through the round and you're racing against the other players to gather as many cards from that central display as possible. So I find these really invigorating. They're very slight games. They're not going to make up the bulk of your collection, I suspect. They're not going to be the meat of a games evening. But as a nice way to pass a small amount of time, I find them really satisfying. Number 74 is action selection. And I've made a whole video about action selection. It's a massive topic, and there's all sorts of different things that could fall under this category. But I suppose I'm thinking of things like rondels. Okay, I've not really explored rondels as much as I'd like to. I think they're a really nice mechanism. That's where you've got a circle of different possible actions, and as the player advances around that circle, they can't go back. So in order to get to the action that they want, they might have to take a few steps to get there but they can't go back to a previous one without going all the way around that circle. I haven't got many rondel games in my collection. I really enjoy them, but they tend to be quite dry sort of historical themes and things like that. I'd really like to see a few more light-hearted, gateway-style rondel games. Maybe that's something that I need to start working on myself. But other games with unique action selection mechanisms, things like Luna. I really enjoy Luna by Stefan Feld. Stefan Feld is great at creating these action selection systems. So in Luna, you've got these little druids, I suppose, or whatever they are, and they're on different islands around this central temple, and when you take the druid off the island, then you get to use the action of the island, and then a lot of the actions are about moving the druid from one island to another by boats and waves and things like this, so that you can get into the right spot for the next round where you might want to take that action. So I really like these often quite convoluted and weird little systems that designers have come up with in quite big strategic games to give us the option of using lots of different types of actions. Number 73 is teamwork. It's quite a nice change of pace when you're used to playing games. The vast majority of games I play on my own, right? Unless it's a cooperative game, I'm playing alone. But some games, a few games, have us working in teams. An example would be Codenames, where one player is the clue giver, and then the other players work together as a team to try and work out what that clue that the clue giver is telling us is all about. Another example would be Team 3 by Brain Games. So in Team 3, you're stacking these different blocks to create shapes, but one player can't look, another player can't speak, and has to use symbols and so on. So you've got all these different limitations on how you can communicate in order to try and build this structure. So it is nice working with other people from time to time as a bit of a change of pace. Number 72 is games which give you the option to select the start player as one of your available actions. So I might forego some great benefit in a worker placement game, for example. I don't want to go for that fantastic benefit over there that I could have. What I'm going to do instead is use my turn to take the start player marker so that on the next round, I'm going to be the first person to pick and I'm going to get the best stuff. Okay, so that's a really satisfying decision. Do I go for the stuff that I want now, or do I go for the start player marker to ensure I get even better stuff in the next round? I think it's a neat mechanism. It changes the way the game flows. Frequently in these games, when you do that, the player to the left of the person with the start player marker will be the next to play, so you'll continue to go in a clockwise direction. And perhaps that's one of the downsides of this mechanism, is that if I take the start player marker, I'm actually benefiting the player to my left, who's also getting, a much better selection than they would have done previously, but they haven't had to actually claim that start player marker. So it's a little bit odd that people get these passive benefits just because of something that you've done, but it doesn't benefit all the other players equally. If you see what I'm getting at. Nonetheless, I think it's a clever mechanism, and it's one that's frequently employed in heavy sort of strategy games, but also in lighter games like Dream Home. Dream Home gives it's a really satisfying decision in there. You can either, when you're drafting cards to build up your lovely house, you can either take 2 cards, a single column from the row of cards, or you could just take 1 card and the start player marker, which means next turn I'm going to be able to take 2 cards, but I can probably take the best 2 cards that are on the display. And then finally, number 71 is pick and pass drafting, another sort of drafting and probably the most common type of card drafting, probably the first thing you'd think of when we talk about card drafting. This is where you have a hand of cards, you select 1 card, which you're going to keep for yourself, and then you pass the rest on, so they get passed around the table with people gradually depleting that pool of cards. It's a lovely mechanism because the same cards will come back to you if the hand was big enough, so you've got a feel for what's in that hand of cards, you've got a feel for what the other players are taking. There are opportunities to take a card to benefit yourself, or maybe take a card to punish somebody else. You take the card that they wanted. Sushi Go is a really, really good version of this. Probably for me, it's the poster child of this mechanism. It used to be Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is a really good game, but it's got a degree more complexity than Sushi Go, which really simplifies it down to its absolute core. I love the game Bunny Kingdom. It's one of my favourite games, and it's certainly my favourite card drafting game. In this game, we're taking a card which references some sort of grid coordinate, and then I can place one of my playing pieces, which is a bunny, onto that grid coordinate and try and claim areas of the board in order to score points. The reason that pick and pass drafting is quite low in my top 100, I suppose, is that it's become so commonplace. It's just everywhere in the hobby. Lots and lots of games use pick and pass drafting, and so I don't tend to get excited about it anymore. It's a bit like, you know, rolling a dice or drawing a card. It's just one of those mechanisms that's always there, always present in so many different games. Nonetheless, that's because it's a wonderful mechanism and it creates fantastic moments. So perhaps I'm being a little bit unfair and it should be much higher on my list. I don't know. What do you think? So as with my previous videos in this list, we're going to finish with one mechanism, my number 8 mechanism, which I don't particularly enjoy. And so what I've chosen for this particular entry is games where you get to use somebody else's power. So I've got a card which says I can use a power belonging to somebody else on this turn. Now at first glance that seems really exciting because I might have lots of options. Maybe they've been using that brilliant power all game and now I get the benefit of using it too. So I see why designers use this in their games, why they incorporate it. But for me, what it does is it means I've got to keep track of what everyone else has got in front of them. And if we're playing a game with, you know, several other players, that's quite a lot for me to keep track of. Or somebody else needs to keep track of it, and they're constantly asking all the time, what was that power you had again? Can I see your powers? What powers have you got? They're leaning over the table to try and see them. It's slowing the game down. You've got to constantly keep track of what's going on in front of every other player, not just in front of yourself. I just feel like it makes the game drag, and it's added complexity, and as lovely a little system as it is, and it might work well in a 2-player game, for example, I find in a multiplayer game, it's a bit of a drag and never quite as exciting as it at first appears. Maybe that's controversial, I don't know. I wonder what you think about that. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please keep coming back for more. There'll be more entries in this as we go down through that top 100. I'll be trying to do a video every couple of days, I would imagine. I really enjoy the comments, the interactions, so please keep that coming. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That really, really helps me. And I look forward to speaking to you in the next video. All the best.